Hello everybody, I'm Luke Menzel, CEO of the Energy Efficiency Council, and on behalf of the Australian Council of Social Service, Australian Industry Group, Energy Efficiency Council and the Property Council of Australia, it is my great pleasure to welcome you to this National Summit on Energy Efficiency and Economic Recovery. Firstly, I'd like to acknowledge that I'm hosting this session from the land of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. I also want to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the many lands on which the speakers and attendees at today's summit live and work, and acknowledge the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people participating in this event. I pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and we celebrate the diversity of Aboriginal peoples and their ongoing cultures and connections to their lands. Also want to acknowledge the moment at which we're all coming together. We are going to spend the next 3 hours considering the economic impacts of our current crisis and ways we can work together to address them. This is first and foremost a health crisis. Australia is faring better than many other nations on the health front, but we are by no means out of the woods. I have members of my team here in Melbourne that were put into lockdown just yesterday. And our hearts go out to the many people around the world in nations rich and poor that are bearing the brunt of this pandemic. So as we explore options for economic recovery, know we're all very conscious that safeguarding physical and mental health is our overriding concern. So, to the summit. At the Energy Efficiency Council, we're proud to be delivering this summit with 3 of our long-time collaborators, ACOS, AI Group and the Property Council of Australia. All 3 have been long-standing campaigners for action to improve Australia's performance on energy efficiency. However, that is not just our goal. It is a goal shared by businesses, professionals, community organisations and environmental groups across Australia, as represented by the incredible list of supporting partners that have signed on for this summit over the last 2 weeks. Now, I can tell you that the list of supporting partners is so long, it was a point of some contention in the team meeting this morning as to whether we had time to read them all out. But I'm going to, because I want to thank each and every one of the following organisations for their support. So thank you to the ACT Council of Social Service, Anglicare Australia, Australian Energy Foundation, Australian Institute of Architects, Australian Institute of Energy, Australian Institute of Landscape Architects, Australian Institute of Refrigeration, Air Conditioning and Heating, Australian Sustainable Built Environment Council, Beyond Zero Emissions, Brotherhood of St Lawrence, Carbon Market Institute, City of Melbourne, City of Sydney, Clean Energy Council, Community Housing Industry Association Australia, Council of Capital City Lord Mayors, Facility Management Association, German Australian Chamber of Commerce, Good Environmental Choice Australia, Green Building Council Australia, Insulation Council Australia New Zealand, Living Future Institute of Australia, Northern Territory Council of Social Service, Planning Institute of Australia, Renew, South Australian Council of Social Service, and last but certainly not least, the Tasmanian Council of Social Service. The length of this list, ladies and gentlemen, underlines the incredible cross-section of support for this topic from right across the Australian community, as does the 700 odd people that have registered and are joining us today to participate in the summit. So let's run through the agenda. It's an event in 3 parts. First, we'll be looking at the political and policy context with Australia's Chief Scientist, Dr Alan Finkel. And I'm pleased to say the Ministers of Environment and Energy in our 2 biggest states, Minister D'Ambrosio and Minister Kean from Victoria and New South Wales, respectively, are also joining us. We'll then move into our Leaders Forum at 3 p.m, in which we'll dig into what energy efficiency opportunities look like in key sectors across the Australian economy. And finally, I'll be having an extended conversation at 4 p.m. with Michael Liebreich, founder of Bloomberg New Energy Finance and a member of the International Energy Agency's Global Commission for Urgent Action on Energy Efficiency. It's a packed agenda and our partners have entrusted me for keeping it on the road. So let's get into it. And with that, it's my great pleasure to introduce Australia's Chief Scientist, Dr Alan Finkel. Dr Finkel is one of the leading contributors to Australia's energy debate, having chaired the seminal Finkel Review into the National Electricity Market, released in 2017, and the National Hydrogen Strategy in 2019. And now Dr Finkel is completing the trilogy, overseeing consultation on Australia's technology investment roadmap, the key plank of the Commonwealth Government's climate change strategy. Welcome, Dr Finkel.
Luke, thank you. A pleasure to be here.
Dr Finkel, you've had a busy month canvassing views on the technology investment roadmap discussion paper around the country, covering all manner of energy technology, not just energy efficiency, but I guess we're interested in the demand side, at least for the purposes of this summit. What have you picked up from stakeholders on the role of technology that helps us use energy more efficiently and productively in Australia's effort to lower emissions?
Well, Luke, as you said, we're in a substantial consultation phase. Actually, we're finishing the consultation phase for the low emissions technology roadmap. And the discussion paper was based on a mapping of 140 different technologies that was done by the Department of Industry with ARENA, with peer review really by the CSIRO. And whilst if energy efficiency and demand side management comes into it in the discussion paper, which is all that it is, it's just to get the discussion going, efficiency is there but not featured. Interestingly, efficiency has come up as a fairly significant recommendation through the consultations. And it's one of those things that's pretty diffuse. It's not as simple as saying, gosh, on the generation side, if we just have lots and lots of solar and wind, problem solved. How you get there is a difficult challenge, but you can sort of see the low emissions generation technologies very, very visibly. You can see the low emissions transport technologies very, very visibly. Hydrogen vehicles for heavy duty vehicles and battery electric vehicles for lighter vehicles. And yes, there'll be overlap and interplay between them, but you can visualize them very easily. Energy efficiency is more difficult, and really it's, what I'm seeing is it's two different things. It's the kind of technologies that truly do reduce the amount of energy that you need, but it's also the enabling technologies that enable you to use those highly visible generation technologies more effectively to reduce emissions. So, you know, the barriers to being more efficient aren't always simply just cost or the lack of available technology. It's understanding drivers for uptake, the skills in the community. And your question was about the technologies that, or the digital technologies that will enable it. There's no question that the ultimate limitation to bringing in more solar and wind and hydroelectricity, or solar and wind, is being able to do that and keep the system stable and match loads to the supply and things like that. So there's just a huge opportunity for enabling technologies such as artificial intelligence at the operating system level, digitalization of virtually everything in the network, two-way communication to the distributed loads, or generation and storage. So at the moment, we don't have effective two-way communication to rooftop solar and basement behind the meter batteries. And there's enormous potential to do that through aggregators, so that the operator can actually anticipate the problems that would reduce our ability to effectively utilize the low emissions generation technologies. Load shifting, demand management, all of those things. The core technologies are there. We need to see the markets evolve to encourage the utilization of those technologies, and ultimately to depend on those digital technologies, those enabling technologies, to allow everything else to work. So that's one of the basically, I'm almost tempted to conclude that one of our high priority technologies would be the basket of enabling technologies.
Look, and I can see a thread running through from the Finkel review to some of the technologies that you just pointed to, because obviously Finkel review was a strong proponent of the need for demand response mechanism in the Australian electricity market. And, you know, the push towards those enabling technologies, as you call them, the digital technologies that allow that demand side flexibility is actually absolutely picking up steam at the international level. And I know when we chat with Michael Liebreich later, that's a topic he's very interested in. I suppose for us in the energy efficiency community, if we can call ourselves that, we're always keen to embrace that conversation because it's a very exciting one, but also not lose sight of the bread and butter energy efficiency measures that we know are out there across the built environment and industry. So some of the things that perhaps haven't received the spotlight that, so as you say, the generation technologies are easy to get our arms around, but are no less crucial, Dr. Finkel, for the transition. And you said something which is very true and stood out to me, which is that often they're quite diffuse. There's different opportunities and challenges in different sectors of the economy. different technologies even. Have you forming any initial views on what the role of government is, or what governments should be doing to unlock those opportunities?
Yes, we are. But just a couple of things that you were mentioning first, I'd like to sort of comment on. One is that part of the work that the Energy Security Board, which came into formation after the electricity review that I led, is doing in its coordination role with AMC and AEMO, is planning the electricity market of the future. And the details of that are just not available. They're deep into the planning phase, but I think knowing from discussions where they're going, where their thinking is, I do believe that the market design will be much more conducive to the distributed resource management, the load management, the factors that will support efficiency really quite significantly. And you're seeing early signs of that. The AMC has a proposed rule change going out to make competitive bidding of load shedding available to bigger players. That's one of the things that I'm just beginning to get a sense of, but I'm not sure about this, but I do get a sense that because of the cost of energy, bigger companies have actually been doing quite a good job over the years on improving the efficiency and productivity of their systems, because they've got the wherewithal. They can go out and hire consultants. There are lots of consultancies out there that advise commercial real estate companies or big energy users in industry on how to improve their processes, and the cost savings justify the consultation and the effort that goes into it. But there's probably less energy efficiency measures fewer that have been taken up at the consumer level, at the residential consumer level. And that's something that ultimately I think has to be addressed. So in terms of government's contribution, one of the things the government can do, of course, is to, over the long term, set minimum standards that would remove poorly performing products from the market. I'm not sure what the Australian government would be interested in doing in terms of actively engaging, but certainly in other jurisdictions. I've seen it myself in Germany and in California. There's an ongoing program to help consumers, especially low-income families, to replace their appliances and do insulation on their houses, the kind of stuff that we're hearing from a lot of the submissions and the recommendations that are being publicly put out there as part of the COVID-19 stimulus response, literally helping individual householders to improve their efficiency. So there's just so many things that can be done, but it's too soon for real clarity. We will be trying to produce our first low emissions technology statement certainly well before the end of this year. And it's just unfortunately too soon for me to tell you, because I don't know to what extent we'll be focusing on efficiency. There will be a substantial references, some level of engagement. I just don't know how it will play out against the other handful of high potential technologies.
Well, Dr. Finkel, I characterise this report as the third in a trilogy, and while I was hoping for spoilers, I wasn't expecting them today, so I understand.
And it's going to be interesting because it's the third in the trilogy, but it's the first one that's going to have an ongoing process. So the intention is that we'll put out a low emissions technology statement that will identify technology areas and the actions that would underpin their adoption by private investment, encouraged by government actions. But the intention is then to have an update every year, year after year after year, which would fine-tune the recommendations as well as assess performance to date. So it's quite interesting that it'll be not just a set and forget and hope for the best. It'll be an adaptive approach. Actually, a little bit like what we recommended in the National Hydrogen Strategy. In the National Hydrogen Strategy, we didn't have a lot of targets per se, but we did have expected measures of success. We didn't have a predicted pathway, but we did have 4 different scenarios. And what the governments have agreed on our recommendation was to have an adaptive approach to assessing the actual outcomes against the scenarios and then looking from time to time at where policy interventions might assist the emerging industry.
Mm. The other thing that strikes me, I suppose, is that's an entirely appropriate approach where you're looking at making innovation investments. You really need to be monitoring the data and calibrating your approach as the results come in, right. One of the things that we've been reflecting on at the Energy Efficiency Council around that innovation agenda and that very exciting energy innovation agenda that the federal government is championing is that if we try and target cost as our primary metric in terms of the diffusion of energy technologies, we can tie ourselves not up in knots when it comes to demand side technologies, because a lot of them are already very cost effective. But that's not to say that there's not a need for innovation, but often the innovation is in supply chains, in skills, in messaging and engagement, in scaling up and rolling out these technologies. What's your sort of theory of innovation? Is that kind of broader definition something that you'll be grappling with in the report?
We won't be focusing on innovation per se, but I do agree with you that there's multiple levels that innovation comes into it. So there's inventive innovation of creating the new technologies, but then there's the adoption innovation. And Australians are really good at innovation in adoption. I mean, look at what we've achieved with rooftop solar. And it's a combination of, the end bill that people are paying and them being smart enough to look out 10 years and recognise where there's a net advantage for them. But it's the innovation on the supply side where companies have worked out how to package government benefits with the actual per kilowatt hour charges that people are both paying and saving. To the extent that we probably have, through that innovative process, some of the best practices in the world. And that gives us an opportunity to actually export skills rather than necessarily export technologies in those areas. So we've got skills and knowledge base to enable us to do that. And I think through the work that ARENA has done over the years, we've had some really innovative approaches to virtual power plants and demand response management, as well as the big generation technologies where we've actually advanced the way that solar farms are deployed, for example, with with tracking, with batteries and deliberate mismatches between the internal peak output and what actually gets delivered to the grid. Tremendously innovative things that aren't widget invention, but nevertheless make the adoption of technologies very, very successful. But so much of that is driven by the consumers and the companies. It doesn't need government. If government can remove regulatory blockers, ensure transparency. So, for example, on transparency, one of the things we recommended in the hydrogen strategy was that we need an international certificate of origin scheme so that for every kilogram of hydrogen that is produced, there's transparency as to how much carbon dioxide was emitted in the production of that kilogram of hydrogen. Well, we believe that having that transparent, robust certificate of origin scheme will enable sophisticated international trade to develop beyond just bilateral, but hubs, blending hydrogen from two different sources to meet an emissions threshold, et cetera, et cetera. So yes, government can remove regulatory blockers, can through its interventions generate or ensure enabling infrastructure such as electric car recharging stations and things like that, and set minimum standards for efficiency, make sure that there's absolute transparency on efficiency. But at the end of the day, the really creative innovation comes from end users, the small companies and the big companies that are supporting those end users. That also requires skill sets, but I don't really think that we've got a shortage of skill sets here. We can always do better, but through the university system, through the vet sector, we've got fairly well-trained people. And I don't hold a narrow belief that a person can only be a rooftop installer of solar panels if they've done a course on rooftop installing of solar panels. Of course, there are certain minimum standards that have to be adhered to and proven through certification. But what I see all the time is that Australian workers, at whatever level they are, they're incredibly adaptable. And once people have learned something well, they can keep pivoting and going off in different directions and do it very, very well. So I don't think there are any workforce limitations that can't easily be overcome. And the training doesn't always have to lead. It's got to be pretty quick at following if it's not leading, but there's always going to be trailblazers who can get it started.
I think you make a fantastic point that it is often the role of government to establish the frameworks for innovation to take place, for markets to develop. And we've got a world-leading example here in Australia, Dr Finkel, in the National Australian Built Environment Rating Scheme, NABERS, which rates commercial building space for its energy performance, and there's an incredible ecosystem of companies that have been built up around that, and commitment from the property sector to increase their NABERS ratings over time, and indeed there's been incredible success in that space because there's transparency around energy performance, and it's something that we often think about. What are the lessons we can learn from something like NABERS for other parts of the economy? How can we build those enabling frameworks for whether it's the residential sector or the industrial sector or other parts of the economy that give people the space to roll their sleeves up and get to work.
And one of the nice things about that is that it's not all of it, but a lot of it is voluntary. I used to be the chancellor of Monash University, and like all universities, we did quite a few building programs, and every time we were sitting down and working with the architects on the next building, we were trying to take it half a star or a star and a half beyond the expected requirements, because by doing that, we made the campus more attractive to students and more attractive to staff. That voluntary drive can be very strong.
Well, look, Dr. Finkel, we're almost out of time, but I'm going to attempt to tempt you out of your remit as the head of the technology investment roadmap discussion process, and look for you to opine, I suppose, on this broader conversation and this very urgent conversation around stimulus. We have got a report from the International Energy Agency in the last couple of weeks, the special report on a sustainable recovery, which they released jointly with the IMF, which advocates for investment in energy efficiency, renewables and grid improvements as a key plank of the stimulus response through the economic crisis that we're facing because of COVID. What do you think of that prescription for a sustainable recovery, efficiency, renewables and grid? And is that one we should be taking on in Australia?
Well, certainly efficiency is the single best thing we can be aspiring to. And I'm not just saying this because it's an efficiency conference and you hear it complimented, but as you all know, a gigawatt that you don't need to generate is the best kind of low emissions generation, the so-called negative gigawatt. In order to make all of that possible, you need the grid stability, the grid design, the digitalisation, the market rules. We need the Energy Security Board working with the ESB in Australia. So I totally agree with that. I think you said the third one was bring on more renewables, solar and wind. And yes, but we will run into limits. We already are running into limits if we don't, where solar farms can't switch on and connect, because there are limitations in transmission capabilities and on the connection standards, all of which have to be worked through as quickly as possible. The AEMO is doing a great job with the integrated system plan, and I think that as it has more and more effect, we'll be able to bring on more and more solar and wind large-scale generation and deal with the vagaries, which are non-trivial, of distributed rooftop solar generation effectively and consistently with a stable grid system. And I see it as an exciting period coming forward where we're using everything, or we need to use everything at our disposal to make it work. It's not just put in a few batteries and suddenly you've got a stable system, or pumped hydro. It's everything, the digitalisation, synchronous condensers, not just the batteries for storage, but batteries because the digital high voltage electronics can give you synthetic inertia and frequency control and voltage strength. Extraordinary opportunities driven by technology being creatively used by those people who want to make a difference.
And there's plenty of those partnering on this event, Dr. Finkel, and also dialing in to listen. And thank you. Thank you for the generosity that you've shared with your time. And good luck with finalising the roadmap. And on a personal note, I just want to say thank you for your incredible contribution to the energy and climate debate over the last 4 years or so. Energy policy in Australia is a pretty challenging space, and you personally have played a huge role in moving the conversation forward despite those challenges. So thank you.
Luke, thank you very much, and good luck for the rest of the very, very important sessions that you'll be running today.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Well, we're now going to hear from the Energy and Environment Ministers from New South Wales and Victoria. Unfortunately, Minister D'Ambrosio and Minister Kean weren't able to join us at this exact time, so we're going to share a recording of the conversations I had with them earlier. I'm now delighted to be joined by Lily D'Ambrosio, Victorian Minister for Energy, Environment and Climate Change. Minister, thanks for joining us at the summit today. I hope you and your family have been well. It's been a tough few months for Victorians.
Really, really pleased to be here, Luke, and I'm really pleased to see that you're being quite innovative and creative to still keep in touch with what is a very important group of stakeholders in the energy efficiency space. So thank you for the invitation.
Oh, it's my pleasure. And you're absolutely right. We're having to be nimble as we move into this new reality, and we're embracing the online space. And we're delighted to have brought so many people together, both our formal partners for this event, but also the many hundreds of people dialing in from around the country to discuss this important issue today. So, Minister, obviously COVID-19 represents an acute health and economic crisis, and dealing with it is an urgent priority. But you would know better than anyone else that climate change looms large in the background, and I know it is a major strategic area for your government. Do you see these as competing priorities, or are they linked in some way? Are there ways of moving the ball forward on all of these issues at once?
Well, look, absolutely, that's the case. And certainly we all wish that COVID-19 had not happened, but it's with us, and dealing with it first and foremost as a health emergency is absolutely what needs to occur. But certainly coming out of it, the other side, whenever that other side is more apparent, is really, really critical for us to understand the economic opportunities as we rebuild the economy. It is very vulnerable now, of course, but rebuilding it will give us opportunities that we need to identify and embrace when it comes to reducing emissions through energy efficiency approaches. And certainly within our government, we've already now for some time put thinking towards what does economic recovery look like. And importantly within that, we are considering matters to do with opportunities that are with us to reduce emissions in that rebuilding of the economy. And we can already start to see that we've announced a number of stimulus packages, economic stimulus packages. In May, just last month, there was an announcement as part of our Building Work stimulus package for an investment in energy efficiency upgrades to social housing, for example, together with a number of other support measures in terms of renewable energy. But certainly energy efficiency is an important area. And certainly there will be more to come in terms of those considerations of rebuilding our economy, the phase, and the opportunities that it can mean for energy efficiency improvements and, of course, climate change action. And this is a really important part of the conversation that always needs to be happening. It's always been at the forefront of our approach to action on climate. That is, of course, absolutely. The number one driver, of course, is environmental benefits and outcomes. We know that there is an absolute relationship that we can draw, being clever in the way that we choose activities and programs to support to get great economic outcomes and the jobs that come with that.
So the driver, I suppose, of linking energy efficiency to stimulus and the economic recovery is got a lot of proponents, both here in Australia but also around the world, Minister. Last week we had the final report from the Global Commission for Urgent Action on Energy Efficiency. It calls for governments to drive economic recovery by directing stimulus spending towards energy efficiency investments. I understand you've had a chance to take a look at the report. What was your key takeaway from that?
Look, it's a great report with some very, very good ideas, and certainly in our department, our government, we're digesting those opportunities and to see where it can fit in to our rebuilding, if you like, of the economy. The thing that's important here too is that during this same period, we're actually working through the actual architecture and the components of our sector pledges that go towards reducing emissions as part of our climate change action. And of course, we have legislation that's in place that makes it very clear that our target is to achieve net zero emissions by 2050.
Yep.
Also that we need to not wait till then to drive action over that period of time, and we are looking at, of course, an interim emissions targets will be for 2025 and 2030, and what are the actual actions and support, funding support that will go to getting those actions out the door that we're working on during the course of this year. So in a perverse way, unintended way, of synergies here and alignments that we're certainly going to be taking full advantage of. Economic recovery stimulus post-COVID, well, not just post-COVID, we've got to do that now, and we have been, but certainly it's about that longer-term recovery work, how we can maximise the activities and the areas of funding, the activities to get better outcomes in terms of energy efficiency. And what that means, therefore, also in terms of the sector pledges and our emissions reduction targets, our interim targets that we'll be announcing in the second half this year.
And we're certainly looking forward to those targets, Minister, and Victoria's been a real leader in the space of actually legislating that net zero commitment and then obviously backing it in this year with those interim targets. Just going back to the global context, the International Energy Agency has been leading on the call for a sustainable recovery, and they've released a report in the last week or so that suggests we can potentially peak global emissions in 2019. Do you think that's realistic in a Victorian or an Australian context?
Look, I think sometimes when we think about are we being too ambitious or are we being realistic, those two things should not be competing. Have ambition, but understand how we need, what is it that we can actually achieve in a period of time. We've always been very ambitious in our state in terms of the emissions agenda, our renewable energy agenda, of course. We've got great ambition, but it's all doable, and we need to make sure that we can deliver. That is absolutely the correct thing for us to focus on. There's no point showing ambition that really there is no way of being able to achieve. I mean, that's wishful thinking, and all it is wishful thinking, and then to the other side of it, we find that we just haven't got anywhere near achieving it. That's not to say you don't have ambition. You need to have both. Can I say that with the reports that have come out, that one thing that I am reminded of is that back when we had the global financial crisis, there was a really terrific opportunity, and there are many countries that actually took up the opportunity to make more progress on climate change action and reduced emissions, and is an important part of that. And there were a number of countries that did very well on the other side of the global financial crisis when it came to reducing their emissions profile and really setting themselves up in terms of their economic profile, the jobs and the environmental outcomes for reduced emissions. And that's something that we've really got to see and grasp globally, the opportunity that presents itself right now through COVID-19. And I'm very confident many countries will be doing that. We will be doing that as a state. And we can only encourage certainly other jurisdictions and certainly the national government to look at it as an opportunity also to come up with some better programs and ride a wave of economic stimulus investment to actually also at the same time reduce our emissions, and certainly energy efficiency and energy productivity was something that sometimes doesn't get a big mention. Productivity is really an important part of the conversation.
Well, it's certainly something which has been an essential part of the conversation that many of the stakeholders that we work with have been trumpeting over the last month or so, Minister. Organisations like the partners on this event, ACOS and Property Council and Australian Industry Group, but also others like Business Council Australia, ACTU, World Wildlife Fund, I could go on, have all been making the point that energy efficiency should form a core part of stimulus packages. Minister, you and I both know that energy efficiency hasn't been at the sexy end of the climate debate and the energy debate over the last decade. Have you been surprised by the way that everyone's been rallying around the flag of energy efficiency over the last little while?
Look, I think it's in terms of the sexiness stakes and I think people have now really starting to understand more that it can often be the cheapest way to get energy to get emissions down, but it also has that double benefit of creating jobs and of course making energy far more affordable. So it's no coincidence that one of the stimulus packages that we announced just in May, $4 million, was targeting social housing clients through energy efficiency upgrades. We know that during this COVID period, we've yet to see, I think, the worst in terms of the bill shock that come, not just to businesses, but certainly households, spending more time at home, working from home, the fragile nature of security of employment in this country has become a very important focal point, but nonetheless, we still have it and it's still with us. And a number, too many people that have just lost their jobs and not had any real security to really be able to see their way through what is a very difficult period. People are going to start getting their gas bills, their electricity bills, and the shock is really going to kick in, and we're yet to see that flush through. So us putting some stimulus money, $4 million to upgrade social housing is an important message, and it's also an important acknowledgement that we can help and make our way through very difficult times by putting down pressure on energy bills, reducing energy consumption through important upgrades that people can have to their homes, and creating jobs along the way. And I think we're only going to see a growth in that understanding, acknowledgement and investment.
Well, I can tell you, Minister, that I was dialed into an international energy efficiency conference with the International Energy Agency just this week, and the Executive Director of the International Energy Agency, Fatih Birol, opened that event by calling energy efficiency a jobs machine. And so, if we can get that machine going here in Australia, I think we'll all benefit. That's
right. And can I just also reflect on our Victorian Energy Upgrades program?
Of course.
Up until about 3 or 4 years ago, but that's been a really terrific demonstration of what can be achieved. And I mean, if you don't mind, just quote you some of the figures. Just over the 11 years that the program's been going, participants have saved about $3 billion on their energy. And you're aware certainly that it's a program that has very, very broad applications. So it's available to all residents. It's available to small, medium-sized businesses. And it's actually supported 2,200 jobs. It continues to do that. It's reduced peak demand, electricity demand by more than 900 megawatts. And it's a winner. It's a winner all round. And I'm certainly going to be making some announcement later in the year with respect to what the new targets will be for the VEU and our commitment. And I'm going to sort of let cats out of the bags, but our commitment is to keep growing this really important flagship program for Victoria. Has been producing results now for a long time. And in Victoria, we've reduced our emissions quite considerably from 2011 till to now. I think it's in the order of about 15%, if I'm not mistaken. And that certainly emissions were at their peak in 2011, and that's going down. And our aim is, of course, to keep them going down.
Absolutely. I mean, and that's what we're talking about today, Minister, the win-win between
exactly right.
saving the economy and hopefully saving the climate as well. Well, thank you for being so generous with your time, Minister. Best of luck to you as you balance all those areas that your government is trying to move forward, and we really look forward to the various announcements that you flagged will be coming over coming months.
Thank you, Luke. And, our aim is to be a modern economy in Victoria underpinned by climate change actions that at its heart will be about reducing energy consumption, and where we do use energy, it's clean energy. And there's a lot of other things, of course, that'll be wrapped up in all of that. But that's our aim, that's our goal, and we will achieve it.
Wonderful. Thank you, Minister.
Thank you.
I'm now joined by Matt Kean, New South Wales Minister for Energy and Environment. Minister, thanks for taking the time to be with us.
Luke, thank you for having me.
Minister, today we've been talking about the new global report from the Commission for Urgent Action on Energy Efficiency. As you know, this report is really focused on how we deal with the dual challenges of economic recovery and climate change by directing stimulus spending towards energy efficiency investments. What stood out to you from this report?
Look, I think the recommendations from this IEA Global Commission are incredibly important and strongly aligned with the challenges that we're working on here in New South Wales. My first observation is that the report continues to articulate something that we've heard from the IEA and many industry bodies in Australia, and that is to meet our Paris Agreement targets, we must do both deep energy efficiency and accelerating renewable energy. So we know that getting to 100% renewables is the key but will take some time. If we don't reduce our energy use whilst doing so, it will take us longer to get there and it will cost us a lot more. So I'm really excited about what we've seen in the IEA's report. It's in line with the New South Wales government's net zero strategy that we need to do renewables, but importantly, the cheapest way to reduce our emissions is actually energy efficiency. The electricity that we don't use is less generation and less cost to taxpayers and consumers.
So, Minister, the International Energy Agency is calling on stimulus spending in the energy space to focus on efficiency, renewables and grid upgrades to ensure global emissions peak in 2019. Do you think peaking emissions in 2019 is an ambition we should be taking on here in Australia?
Absolutely, I do. I mean, I think this is critically important. The lesson that I've taken from the short time I've been in the portfolio is that there is a first mover advantage for those countries that are able to decarbonise quickly. I mean, this debate is only moving in one direction. We've already got 50% of the world's GDP that signed up to hit net zero emissions by 2050. So those countries that can get there sooner have an enormous competitive advantage when it comes to trade or dealing in a low carbon global economy. Australia can be an energy superpower, and in doing so become an economic superpower. So should we be reducing or ensuring that peaking emissions in 2019 is an ambition? Absolutely. There's a lot at stake here. We need to see a permanent and dramatic decoupling of economic prosperity going up from emissions going down. It's important to note that New South Wales emissions have already fallen around 18% from a peak in 2005, but our scientists' modelling suggests that we're only going to flatline to 2030 unless we're committed to serious action. So our reforms, being the net zero strategy or our electricity strategy, are expected to deliver a 35% reduction in emissions by 2030 below 2005 levels. But importantly, the plan to 2030 is just stage one towards the target of net zero by 2050. New opportunities inconceivable today will emerge over the next decade, and that the plan should not be seen as the final word on emissions reduction, but a foundation on which we can build. And that's why we're also investing in the next wave of emissions reduction innovation to ensure economic prosperity from decarbonising beyond 2030. And this includes significant investments in hydrogen and clean energy development. So Yes, there are some big challenges and threats, but there are enormous opportunities. And we've got a choice as a country, we've got a choice as a state. Do we go out there and grab them and set ourselves up to underwrite our prosperity for future generations, or do we want to be left behind and become a rust bucket state? It's that simple.
Mm-hmm. I suppose you're pointing to a message from the IEA is that we need to show ambition in this space, and that by showing ambition and setting bold targets and then backing ourselves to meet them, then we can get a lot done.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, fortune favours the brave. And as I said, there's an enormous opportunity. If you move quickly, you can get a competitive advantage, and it becomes a barrier to entry. If we install the energy efficiency programs and the low-cost, clean, cheap generation into our system here, then that means that other countries won't do that, because it will just be more efficient for them to get their energy or get their goods and services made in Australia and shipped over to those countries. It's a bit like what the United Arab Emirates did in the oil industry. They built all the refineries and whatnot, and became a barrier to entry to other countries going in and building that infrastructure. So in the modern economy, in the modern way we're going to get our electricity, we can be the UAE of clean, renewable energy, and we should grab that opportunity. And as a result of having a competitive advantage of clean, cheap energy, you will see heavy manufacturing, smeltering, aluminium production deciding to domicile here in Australia, because in those energy intensive industries, if they can get low cost, clean electricity, it will set them up for success as we move towards a global low carbon economy.
I guess that's the exciting thing for me in that vision of Australia being an energy superpower. It's actually not just about the energy exports, it's about the clean industry that we can set up here, really establishing Australia as a 21st century industrial superpower.
Yeah, I mean, it's an opportunity too big to miss, so why wouldn't we grab it?
All right. So you'd say the IEA's prescription of efficiency and renewables and grid upgrades for a sustainable recovery is just about right?
I think so. I mean, we've made some announcements up here in New South Wales. Last week, I announced the nation's first coordinated renewable energy zone. That's around Dubbo, and it's really attracted major interest from renewables investors and project proponents. But we've also got some big plans around energy efficiency. We'll also introduce a peak demand scheme to support technologies like batteries that will help shift electricity demand away from peak periods. So it's about getting the renewables in the system, transitioning the grid, but it's also about reducing peak demand to save costs for consumers, businesses and households across New South Wales.
You've mentioned the net zero plan, the plan phase 1 to 2030 several times now, and much of that spending isn't slated to start until 2022. Are you looking at bringing forward some of the spending in areas like reducing the energy intensity of manufacturers, say, to align with stimulus objectives and restart the New South Wales economy?
Yeah, we're currently working through that process at the moment. We're working closely with the Treasurer. We see the focus of our stimulatory spending should be on three things. Firstly, jobs. Does it get money out the door quickly, and will it be productivity enhancing? And all the things that we're talking about today, renewables, grid and efficiency, tick all those boxes. So we've put together a very progressive package to the Treasurer. I'm hoping that he'll let me spend some money to do what we're going to have to do anyway, which is transition our grid, not just because of the environmental necessity to doing it, but also because we're currently relying on really old technology and really old kit to provide our electricity. Those generators that have provided our electricity supply for over 30, 40 years, they're coming to the end of their lives. And, whether you like it or not, we're going to have to replace them. There are new technologies, both dealing with energy efficiency and also generation, that are now available that can deliver cheaper, reliable and cleaner energy into the system. So yes, is it part of our stimulus thinking to help us come out of the COVID pandemic? Absolutely.
I guess we talked a little bit about the global context, and I know you headed overseas last year. You were at least in Germany and Europe for a period in late last year, looking at what's happening around the world. What are the economies that you look to as kind of as leaders in this space, and what were the big ideas that came out of that trip for you that you've brought back to New South Wales?
Look, the big thing I took out of my trip overseas was how far behind we are here in Australia. You know, we had a decade of malaise because of, you know, political wrangling over whether or not climate change is real. That's held us back. I mean, let's get serious about this. Australia, yes, whilst we're a small contributor to overall global emissions, we're also a small open market economy, and our fortunes will be determined by global megatrends. There's no bigger global megatrend than the move towards zero net emissions. Australia's prosperity for generations has been underwritten by us being able to sell our goods and services internationally. And the reality is that the markets that we currently sell our goods and services to, they're moving. If we want to be able to continue to sell things overseas, then we're going to need to reduce our carbon footprint here. And there is an added benefit to doing so. We've got some of the best renewable resources anywhere on the planet. We've got some of the best scientific and innovative minds anywhere in the world. So, you know, being able to do low carbon intensity goods and services, reduce demand on the system, these kind of things will set us up to be a global energy superpower. And that means a global economic superpower in a low carbon global economy.
Well, finally, Minister, you've held your current portfolio for a little over a year now. In that short time, I'd say you've done a lot, and you haven't been shy, as we've just heard, about laying out a positive vision for decarbonising the Australian economy. We seem to be at a moment where there is a lot of positive momentum from across the community for setting ourselves on a net zero pathway. How do we ensure we grasp this moment for change?
Look, I think it needs a couple of things from our political leaders and also industry. It needs courage, it needs ambition, and I guess it needs, you know, determination. There's certainly three things that I hope I'm bringing to the role. There is a huge opportunity here for our state and indeed our nation, but we've just got to be willing to grab it. Right now, we're being held back by vested interests and people that are using this debate to further a political agenda. I don't think that's been helpful. I think there's a big opportunity right now to rebuild our economy on a new low carbon trajectory. It's been necessary for governments to borrow to get through the COVID crisis, and this will have to be repaid by our children. But we owe it to them to rebuild the economy in a way that minimises the cost that they will bear to mitigate and adapt to climate change. So I'm optimistic about the economic opportunities available to New South Wales and indeed the country from decarbonising the economy. I've commissioned the Chief Scientist in New South Wales to deliver a report looking into the economic opportunities for New South Wales from decarbonising. The scoping paper released in March has revealed many exciting prospects. These range from low emissions technologies to grow advanced manufacturing and to support our mining and agricultural industries, to the building of renewable energy zones, the first of which, as I mentioned, we announced last week, in accelerating the integration of new and existing renewable technologies. So I'm also very keen to explore export opportunities for New South Wales and becoming a world leader in clean technologies, particularly in the energy efficiency space. We're already a world leader through Neighbours in commercial building energy efficiency. Luke, I know that's something that you're a big fan of. But we can add to this in other energy efficiency technologies, renewables and hydrogen. So I'm eagerly awaiting that Chief Scientist's final report, and I think it will provide excellent input to help shape how we proceed. The last key point that I want to make is that it's not just up to governments. It requires all sections of society, including the finance sector and investors, if we are going to see the serious and responsible action that we need to see on climate change and dealing with this issue and the opportunities, and grab the opportunities from doing so. So I guess I'm trying to do my bit. New South Wales government is trying to do our bit to support industry, all businesses, households, farmers and communities doing what they're already realising that we need to do and indeed start to do. And that's make the transition to a prosperous net zero future.
Well, Minister, I guess the support that we've received for this event, along with our partners, Property Council, AO Group, and ACOS, as well as the many supporting partners, and indeed the hundreds of people that have dialed in for this event, suggests that support and that willingness to partner with government is absolutely there. So we look forward to working with you over the coming months to make that vision a reality.
Well, Luke, can I just say to all those people that are tuning into your very fine conference today that how much I appreciate the leadership role that you play and your organisation plays, and how important it is to me, your thought leadership and support as we try and take advantage of these remarkable opportunities that are there for us in a global low carbon future.
Thank you, Minister. Looking forward to getting it done.
Thanks, Luke.
Hi again, everybody. It was great to catch up with Minister D'Ambrosio and Minister Kean. And I suppose the thing I took out of those chats was a reinforcement of the fact that there's a high degree of bipartisanship in this space. There's an understanding from those two leading governments of the role of energy efficiency at this critical moment. But it's all to play for. The decisions around stimulus will be made in the coming weeks and months, and so the messages that government is hearing from all of the partners involved in this event, as well as everybody that's dialed in and is listening along at home, will be absolutely crucial. We'll now take a short break, and I'll be back with the leaders panel at 3 p.m. sharp. So see you soon.